At this point in time, let's go. I'd like to welcome to the stage Mark Keene. He's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Travel and Tourism at the International Trade Administration. Mark?
Well, thank you very much, Lee. It is so good to see all of you. Good afternoon. My name is Mark Keene, and it's a real pleasure to join you here at the Hunter Conference. And the first thing I did when I landed in Atlanta and I saw that there was a room full of business folks and folks from the hospitality industry, I took my tie off because I said, I'm not in Washington, D.C. anymore. I don't need to be all stuffy and bureaucratic. So it's great to get me out of Washington, D.C., although I wish I could stay longer and enjoy the rest of the program with you. But unfortunately, it's budget season in Washington, and there are lots of meetings going on Capitol Hill and so many other things going on, which I'll tell you about in a second. But I do want to leave a little bit early. But let me, before I start my remarks, let me also acknowledge a few people. Of course, Lee, and thank you, Teague. I'm not sure where he is, but Lee and Teague, as well as Bob, for his vision for creating this opportunity to bring everybody together. All the staff, the sponsors, the volunteers, especially the students from Georgia State. Can we give them a big shout out and a big applause? The students at Georgia State at Cecil B. Day School of Hospitality is really literally your future. And so I'm glad that they're starting up early in this industry. I am also very glad, and I don't know if I saw Brian Quinn here from Sonesta, but he, a few months ago when I ran into him in Washington, D.C., suggested that our secretary can come down and speak to you all about what's happening in Washington, D.C. at the Department of Commerce. Very unfortunately, because of her international travel schedule, she wasn't able to make it, but she asked me to come and convey her deep appreciation for what you're doing, your industry, as well as all the work that you are doing at this critical time. But specifically, she wanted me to single out a few people who serve and have in the past served on her Travel and Tourism Advisory Board. It's the U.S. government's official private sector industry sounding board, if you will, for the Department of Commerce to understand what's happening in your industry. And Brian Quinn is one of your members here, is one of our former members of TTAB, as is a keynote speaker tomorrow, I believe. I just saw the schedule. Your speaker is Sheila Johnson from the Salamander Group. She used to serve on our board as well, so thank you for her service as well. And there are many, many others, including members of Marriott and other hotels as well. So I want to thank you for stepping up in your ways on behalf of the private industry to support the government and our work here. I want to just share a few minutes today and I have the honor of being the opening speaker, so I kind of have to make sure I start off on the right foot here. I want to make sure that you understand where we are today, not only as your industry, but as your government, and where we are in the private and public sectors at this very critical juncture as we're kind of slowly creeping out of the pandemic, the last 3 years of nightmare that we had, into something that seems to be a little bit optimistic, and yet, looking at the headlines every day, it's hard to understand that we're fully out of the woods yet, right? I mean, the consumer confidence, Wall Street confidence is not quite where we would like it to be for the work that you want to do in the future. So at this critical juncture, I want to share a little bit about what the government is doing to make sure that we are doing our part to ensure that the travel and tourism industry is as strong as possible, that you recover as fully as possible and quickly as possible as well. But I think in order to understand where we're going, I think we have to start by looking back and understanding where we were. And none of us in this room wants to remember what happened in March of 2020, as Lee was just mentioning. That was the first time that he had to cancel this conference after 34 years or 35 years of hosting it every single year. That was the first time that he had to cancel it, along with the gazillion other events and programs and vacations and meetings that had to be canceled because of the COVID pandemic. If you think back, not that year, the 2020, the critical year, but the year before that, and looking back about a decade, my office, by the way, the National Travel and Tourism Office, which I have the honor of representing and leading in the Commerce Department, is the office that is the federal government's expert and the official resource for information that deals with the travel and tourism industry. We have different data points, we have studies, research reports, and even though I have a really long title in my job, my go-to title is Chief Tourism Officer for the United States. So when I travel overseas and I meet with ministers of tourism in other countries, we talk about how well our travel tourism sector is doing. And so we share a lot of data and anecdotes and stories about what's going on, but we also share policy ideas so that we can understand where both governments and private sector are heading. And in that context, I think it's important for us to remember where we were. And I'll just go back 10 years, because before 2020, if you think about the horrible time that we had from the pandemic on to where we are now, starting in 2019 and going back about a decade, that was an unprecedented time for the travel, tourism, accommodation, lodging, however you want to expand that definition of this industry sector. It was an unprecedented time because for that 10-year history, we had growth in America like you've not seen before. We had growth where, in our economic models, we call these, there's this concept called person trips. It's every time a person leaves their home about 50 miles or more, spends the night at a hotel like here, and in many of your fine places, and does that for not a job where they're being paid to be at that place, but on behalf of a business or a school or leisure or something like that. So we count that as a way to count how productive your industry is. And if you go back to 2009, that statistic told us that there were about 1.9 billion person trips that were happening in the United States. By 2019, that number grew to 2.3 billion. That's about a 22% increase, which meant that the trajectory was more people were traveling outside of their homes to spend money in your hotels and restaurants and using the lodging and the travel, ground transportation, air transportation, trains, what have you. And that meant that our country is becoming more and more mobile. Now, obviously, technology helps a lot in terms of opening opportunities, but just brick and mortar businesses were benefiting tremendously as a result of that change in the years. At the same time, if you look at the international market, which is where I'm from, I work in the International Trade Administration at the Department of Commerce, we look at our US export and our power of competition vis-a-vis other countries. And if you look at what happened in that same time period, in 2009, we received somewhere around 55 million international visitors who came to the United States to spend their money here, whether for business, for schools, for conferences, for family vacations, to go to their attractions and national parks. That number by the year 2019 became 79.4 million people. So that meant that we're growing about 25% million people in that 10-year time frame, which is a tremendous growth. And had we kept on going in that phase, you and I would all be sitting in an industry that is just flourishing, that you will be leading. Now, you already created 9.9 million jobs in America. You already created $1.9 trillion of economic input already, export output already. You would have been doing even better had the COVID pandemic not happened. But of course, unfortunately, it did, and we're still struggling with that. In that 1 year, from 2019 to 2020, just that 1 year alone, the impact on our nation, our global economy was obviously tremendous, and we all know the stories behind it. But in your sector specifically, travel and tourism, you were not only the worst hit and the deepest hit in all the industry sectors, but you were also the one that had the hardest time coming back than most of the other sectors. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? I mean, if the government tells you you can't go out, if the government tells you can't go to school, you go to your job, the businesses have to close, restaurants have to close, you can't sell anything in a retail store, how are you supposed to survive in an industry that is dependent on people interacting with each other? And as a result of that, for 2020, your job creation went from 9.9 million to 5.5 million. You lost about half of the jobs in 1 year alone. Just from February to April of 2020, just those 3 months alone, your industry impacted half of the US's GDP, okay? So that's how much your jobs, unfortunately, impacted. As a result of that, we've been working as hard as possible to bring you back into this shape that we're in. We passed we came up with a blueprint, and we passed a national travel and tourism strategy, which gives us a blueprint for a way to get out from under the COVID to a recovery that needs to happen. So we're working on about 4 different pillars on that. I'm not going to get into the boring details of what a government document does, but you can certainly look it up online. But for your purposes, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts, and I want to ask you for a couple of assistance as well. We are now heading in a situation where in about a month and a half, on May 11th, the President of the United States will be not letting the national emergency order on COVID continue on. He's going to let it expire on May 11th. That week also happens to be the 40th anniversary of the National Travel and Tourism Week. And so we'll all be celebrating us getting back into the towns and cities and traveling, going overseas and bringing international travelers back here. So in that dynamic, in a few months, we're going to be launching and we're going to be releasing some congressional reports on studying on how the impact of the travel and tourism industry has been on COVID. At that time, we'd like to ask you to do a few things for us. First and foremost, as we're returning travel back to where it ought to be, we want to learn some lessons. We want to hear from you. What are specific incidences or anecdotes or analysis or research or data that you might have to share with us on how it impacted your industry specifically? Now, we had a Travel and Tourism Advisory Board meeting yesterday, and you're going to hear from Adam Sachs and a couple of speakers from now. He was on that meeting with us, and we talked about these data. We have a report to Congress due, and I am literally working on this as we speak. We want to have input from the industry about what the impact was on your end so that we can incorporate that conversation into the dialogue so that we have lessons learned going forward. That's one. Secondly, as we're thinking about how do we bring back travel and tourism in a way that will be economically flourishing for you as well as our country, we can't ignore the international dynamic, because I come from Virginia, and many of you are from 36 or 37 states that I heard, but we're in Georgia. If I came to Georgia from Virginia and spent money at this hotel, it's great for Georgia's economy, not so good for Virginia's economy, but frankly, the United States is at a net neutral. But if we were to bring somebody not from Georgia here, but the country of Georgia to here, or Athens, not Georgia, but Athens, Greece, and they spent money here at this hotel, that's a net plus for the USA. That's what we call export travel revenue that we would generate. We were, from 2009 to 2019, I mentioned that our numbers of people coming from 55 to 79 million people. During that time, our trade surplus grew from $22 billion to $54 billion because we raised so much money from people coming from overseas. So that's what we're also focused on as well. How do we bring more international travelers to come here so that they're part of our business, jobs, economy, workforce, as well as hotels and hospitality industry through leisure and any other conferences that you're doing, the big MICE programs and the conventions and such. We really want to encourage you to do that and target international countries, because that's the way for our country to stay ahead of the curve as far as international competition. And on that note, one of the best things that we can all work together, it's a couple years from now, the World Cup is coming, 2026. This city right here, as well as 11 cities in the United States, will be hosting the World Cup. And I'm part of a team that, you're going to hear from Secretary Chad Wolf next, but his agency, his former agency, and I and the State Department are working right now on the visa issue. I know that's a big concern for many of you. Visas, as well as doing everything we can to make sure that our government is ready for huge global conferences like the World Cup, Olympics, Expos, all these other big things that are happening. And maybe you know about this because you're ahead of the curve. Tell us in advance which events that you know about at your hotels, so that your government, at the federal, state, and local governments, we can coordinate and make sure that the visas, your entry, your facilitation within the airport, your luggage clearances, all those things are not going to be a problem for you to be able to attract and bring international travelers to the United States. Because again, that means dollars in our pockets for our country when we bring international travelers into the United States. So that's a major focus of ours. And I'll leave you with this. The good news is, as we are looking at the forecast starting with May, and as we celebrate the 40th anniversary of National Travel and Tourism Week, as the President lifts the emergency order, we started doing some forecasting of where we're going next. And my office just released a forecast which found that we are going to meet the goals that we set up in the National Travel and Tourism Strategy. We were very ambitious last year. We said, in the middle of the crisis, we said, you know what, if we work really hard together, private and public sector together, by 2027, we might be able to hit 90 million international travelers. And based on our economics, they'll spend about $280 billion of income for our country. Well, our forecast that we just released last month indicates that this year, so remember I said 79 million in 2019. 2020, we dropped down to 19 million. 2021, we were right up at 22. 2022, we just got up to 51 million. This year, we anticipate we'll have 61 million people visiting the United States. Next year, 70s, the year after, 80s, and by golly, the year 2027, which we put in writing, we're going to forecast to meet 91 million people visiting the United States, which will then generate the kind of income that we want. So we are on our way out of the pandemic towards the road to recovery. But we cannot do this without you. So number one, give us some feedback about your experiences. My email is, and everything else, you just Google it, mark.kim@trade.gov, that's my name. Just go ahead and email me your information, anything that you want to talk about, what your experience has been. We want to use that as lessons learned for us. Number two, start preparing for the influx of international travelers, especially World Cup and other big events, and tell us about these in advance so that we can be a partner for you. And number three, let me close with this. I talked about the bad years of 2020, and I talked about the good years from 2009 to 2019. And as you're gathering today and tonight at your cocktail reception, I hope you'll party like it's 2019. Thank you.